Welcome, boys and girls. This is Bunjmin Bakchoi. So, you've watched Drive to Survive and want to get into Formula One but have no idea how the sport works. Well, you've come to the right place. This is Formula One for Americans by an American. In this video, we'll give you a broad overview of how the sport works, or at least enough for you to follow along as you watch a race weekend. So, I apologize in advance for this not being a super in-depth video on Formula One. For any hardcore fans, this isn't really for you, but if you feel like I've missed any of the basics, do feel free to let me know in the comments section. I'll be breaking this down into a few different categories to not overwhelm new fans, though I may jump back and forth every now and again. But without further ado, let's get started. The teams. For the 2023 season, there are 10 teams on the grid, fielding 2 drivers each. Every driver will be individually racing for the Drivers' Championship, which is awarded to the driver with the most points at the end of the season. And each team will be competing for the Constructors' Championship, which is awarded to the team whose drivers combined for the most points. This makes some races interesting, as teams with drivers close on track need to balance out maximizing the team's points with making sure the drivers themselves don't feel like one driver is prioritized over the other. Some teams will allow their drivers to fight each other on track, while other teams have no qualms about having it publicly known one driver is favored. If a driver for some reason cannot start a race, a replacement driver may be elected to drive their car in the Grand Prix. If said driver ends up scoring points, those points will count towards the team's points in the Constructors' Championship standings, but not towards the driver they replaced. The replacement driver will just be added on to the list of drivers in the drivers' standings with however many points they earned all season. Teams are made up of known automotive companies as well as privately owned teams. This year's teams are Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, Aston Martin, McLaren, Alpine, Alfa Romeo, Haas, AlphaTauri, and Williams. For most Americans, Red Bull are like the Kansas City Chiefs, defending champions and currently the best. Mercedes are like the Brady-era Patriots, dominated so long that most people hate them, but they're kind of in a rebuild phase right now with an old-ass leader at the helm. Ferrari are the Dallas Cowboys. They have a history of winning, seem promising when the season starts, but always manage to self-sabotage because the owner is an idiot. Every other team is your middling team of choice who are never really in the fight for the top. Sorry, I don't watch much NFL anymore. While in previous years, teams could spend as much as they'd like, this isn't the case anymore. Starting in 2021, Formula One introduced a cost cap, which is kind of like a salary cap in North American sports. But whereas salary caps usually deal with just player salaries, the cost cap covers the running of the team. Oddly enough, the driver's salaries don't actually fall under the cost cap. Here is a list of what is covered and what isn't covered. Actually, now that I think about it, the cost cap is nothing like the salary cap. I mean, driver salaries aren't even counted in the cost cap. But like North American sports, no one is seemingly punished for going over, as both Red Bull and Aston Martin have gone over the cost cap in 2022 and pretty much gotten slaps on the wrist. Where a team finishes determines how much wind tunnel time they get to develop their car. The lower you finish, the more wind tunnel time you get the next season. The higher you finish, the less time you get the next season. This was implemented to try and keep the competition close on track. Team wind tunnels are monitored by FIA officials and 24/7 security cameras to ensure everyone follows the rules. The cars. Formula One runs 1.6-liter V6 turbo hybrid engines and will do so until the 2025 season, when the regulations for engines will change. Currently, there are 4 engine manufacturers that provide the grid with all their engines. Although teams must build their own cars, power units and other lesser parts can be bought from these bigger manufacturer teams. Mercedes, Aston Martin, McLaren, and Williams use Mercedes power units. Ferrari, Alfa Romeo, and Haas use Ferrari power units. Red Bull and AlphaTauri use Red Bull powertrain/Honda or whatever they're calling themselves today, and Alpine uses their in-house Renault engine. And although McLaren, Aston Martin, and Alfa Romeo build their own road cars, they still rely on other manufacturer teams for power units and lesser parts in Formula One. The aerodynamics on a car, or the wings and fins you see all over, have to follow a set of strict guidelines and regulations, and must be developed by the teams themselves. This has resulted in cars that look similar at first glance, but are completely different when you look a little bit closer. The cars can be developed throughout the year, with teams sometimes scheduling upgrades for specific tracks. So a car you might see finishing last for the first 5 races could possibly jump up to 8th or 7th on the grid after a successful upgrade is brought in, though sometimes these upgrades don't always work as hoped. Now let's talk about some terms and car features that you may see or hear about on a race weekend. DRS is the drag reduction system implemented in 2011 to help promote more overtaking in Formula One races. There are certain areas on track with the DRS detection line. If a following car is within 1 second of the car ahead at a DRS detection line, the following car is allowed to open their rear wing to help reduce drag and assist in overtaking in the next DRS zone, usually a straight or straight-ish section on track. DRS is enabled on lap 3 and disabled under a safety car, virtual safety car, in wet weather, or if a yellow flag is shown in or around the DRS zone. ERS, or Energy Recovery System, is a battery system that stores and produces extra power for the car. There are two components that help with this, the MGUK, which harvests heat lost through braking similar to road cars, and MGUH, which harvests energy from the turbo and spins it at low revs to eliminate turbo lag. It's definitely more complex than that, but for simplicity's sake, it's a battery system that can be charged and discharged to provide extra power. If you hear an engineer telling a driver on the radio to quote-unquote use overtake, they are telling the driver to drain their battery for more power. This can be harvested and discharged throughout the entire race. The MGUH will be gone in 2026, but for now it's a part of Formula One. Tire deg refers to tire degradation. If a driver says he has high deg, it just means his tires are wearing out and are losing grip with the track. Oversteer and understeer describes a car's balance going into a corner. If the car is understeering, the front tires are losing grip and a driver will go deep into a corner. Oversteer is the opposite and the back end will lose grip, producing something similar to a drift car going around a corner. You will hear drivers complain about one or the other plenty of times throughout a race weekend. You will hear other terms from drivers and engineers like brake bias or diff settings, which are just other terms relating to the balance of a car, but they aren't super important in understanding a race, so we won't go over them in this video. There will be many other terms you will hear, but these will probably be the most common. The race weekend and race. Throughout the season, Formula One visits many countries on many continents. The only continents where races are currently not held are Antarctica and Africa, with the last African Grand Prix being held in South Africa in 1993. Other than the Monaco Grand Prix, every race needs to go 305 kilometers or about 190 miles. And since tracks have laps of all shapes and sizes, this means every Grand Prix has a different amount of laps. Races at short tracks like the Red Bull Ring in Austria are 71 laps long, while a race at a long track like Spa-Francorchamps in Belgium is only 44 laps long. There are also time limits within which a race must end. A race must end within a 2-hour period of when it starts, regardless of how many laps have been completed. If a race has to stop for bad weather or red flagged for a bad incident, then the race cannot exceed 3 hours. This was the case in Japan 2022, where the race was red flagged after a few laps due to weather conditions, and ended after only 28 of the scheduled 53 laps were completed, but for the most part, races usually end in about an hour and a half. The race weekend starts on Thursday with press conferences and interviews, but the action on track starts on a Friday. Generally, Free Practice 1 and Free Practice 2 are held on Friday, Free Practice 3 and qualifying on Saturday, and the race on Sunday. Free practice is exactly what it sounds like. Teams test setups, race strategies, and try out the tire compounds. Qualifying is broken up into 3 sessions, and all drivers are allowed on track at all times. In Q1, which is 18 minutes long, the 5 drivers with the slowest lap times are eliminated, and again another 5 eliminated in the 15-minute long Q2. Q3 is 12 minutes long, and lap times at the end of the session determine where a driver will start on race day. Anyone eliminated in Q1 or Q2 will start in the position they finished their latest qualifying session, barring any grid penalties. Drivers start in the highest position of the latest qualifying session they are involved in. Before we get to the rules of a race, let me explain the tire situation. Pirelli, the tire provider, has 6 dry compounds to choose from, labeled C0, the hardest, most durable, but slowest compound, to C5, the softest, least durable, but fastest compound. At each race, Pirelli chooses 3 consecutive tires and labels them hard, medium, and soft. So for example, C3 hard, C4 medium, and C5 soft. You will never see a combination of, say, C0, C2, and C5. The compounds must be consecutive. There are also 2 wet tires, the inters for mild rain, and wets for when there are literal puddles on the ground. These 2 are always available at every race. While we are here, let's talk about parc fermé. Parc fermé literally means closed park in French. Cars go into parc fermé condition once qualifying starts. This means that however a car is set up for qualifying is how the car will stay until the race starts. Only minor changes to the car can be made, like changing tires, refueling the car, and adjusting certain parts of the front wing. However, there are exceptions, like changing weather conditions, in which case teams can make adjustments to cars for safety reasons. But for the most part, only the aforementioned minor changes can be made to the car. Once the race starts, teams can then make whatever change they'd like, no matter how big, though this rarely ever happens, as the time lost making major changes will pretty much make it impossible to come back and recoup the time lost on track. Breaking parc fermé conditions will result in the car in question having to start from the pit lane at race start, meaning the car cannot start its race until all legal cars have driven by the pit lane exit at the start of a race. Cars are also kept in parc fermé conditions after the race to allow FIA scrutineers to check that the car is still legal after any and all changes made during the race. With that out of the way, the most important rule that you need to know is that each driver must use 2 compounds in the race. Some people think the rule is that each driver must make at least 1 pit stop, but that's not so. The rule is a driver must use 2 different compounds. So if a driver starts on the soft tires, pits once during the race onto another set of soft tires, he will end up disqualified. But if a driver starts on the softs, pits once onto the mediums, then it meets the 2 compound requirement. If there is rain, then this rule goes out the window for safety reasons. There are obviously other rules drivers must follow, but they are mostly common sense rules like stay on the track, don't drive into other drivers, blah blah blah. And obviously, whoever completes the required amount of laps first is the winner. Any driver not on the lead lap no longer needs to complete the required amount of laps. For example, if a race is 50 laps long and driver B is only on lap 48 when driver A finishes his 50th lap, driver B no longer needs to complete 50 laps. His race ends when he completes his 48th lap. Points are awarded as such, with 1 point awarded for the fastest lap in the race so long as the driver finishes in the top 10. If the driver with the fastest lap does not finish in the top 10, then no point is rewarded to anyone. During a sprint race weekend, the schedule is as follows: FP1 in qualifying on Friday, FP2 on Saturday, followed by the sprint race where drivers start in the position they qualified in on Friday qualifying. Points for sprint race finish positions are awarded to the top 8 drivers, with first place getting 8 points and 8th place getting 1 point. On Sunday, the starting grid is determined by where a driver finished the sprint race. So if a driver qualified on Friday in 12th, but finishes the sprint race on Saturday in 6th, then they will start the featured race on Sunday in 6th. This race awards points like any other race. When there are issues on track, drivers may have to deal with a safety car, virtual safety car, or red flag. In safety car conditions, an actual safety car will come out to pick up the leader and the rest of the grid bunches up behind the safety car and race leader. The safety car will lead the cars slowly around the track until whatever debris or obstruction on track is cleared. When it is cleared, the safety car comes into the pit lane and the lead car acts as a de facto safety car and continues to lead the cars back to the start line for a rolling start. Once the safety car makes it into the pit, the race leader can decide to start racing whenever they'd like, though no overtaking is allowed until drivers hit the start-finish line. You will see safety cars come out for inclement weather or large incidents on track that will take a few laps to clear. A VSC, or virtual safety car, means cars must slow down to a certain speed limit on track wherever they are and overtaking is prohibited. However, no safety car comes out. They drive around at the VSC speed limit until the VSC ends, at which point the race will pick back up and racing resumes as normal, no matter where the drivers are on track. VSCs usually occur when there are smaller incidents on track where debris may not take longer than a lap or 2 to clear. Note: cars are allowed to pit under the safety car and VSC to make tire changes to meet the 2 compound requirement. Red flags are a suspension to the race. All racing stops on track and drivers are required to come back to the pit lane. This usually occurs when major incidents or really bad weather occurs and the race needs to stop for an extended period of time to clear the debris or wait out the weather. Again, drivers may change their tires to meet the 2 compound requirement, and teams may make any changes to the car so long as the car will pass post-race legality checks. Generally, races will start back on the starting grid, like at the start of a race, with cars being placed in order they were at the time the race was stopped. Sometimes races and positions will be rolled back to an earlier part of the race, but this is rare, though it did happen at the 2022 British Grand Prix. Various flags can also be displayed on track to inform drivers of race or track conditions. We will go over the more common ones. Yellow. A yellow flag can be single or double. It means there is potential obstruction or a dangerous situation on track. Cars are required to slow and no overtaking is allowed. Can be a full course yellow or just shown in certain sections of the track. Red and yellow. A red and yellow flag means slippery track conditions. For example, oil or water on track. Green. A green flag means normal racing resumes. Black and orange. A black and orange flag is shown to a driver whenever there is damage to their car and requires them to go back to the pit lane to fix the damage. For example, if their front wing is damaged and there are pieces flying off the front wing, a driver might be shown the black and orange flag to inform them to come back and change out their front wing. Black and white. A black and white flag is a warning to a certain driver for breaking one rule or another. Black. A black flag is shown to a driver who is disqualified. If a driver is continuously shown a black and orange flag or a black and white flag and don't do anything about it, they will eventually see the black flag. Blue flag. Blue flags are used by marshals to alert a driver to the presence of a faster car about to lap them. The driver is required to let the lapping car by. If a driver ignores 3 blue flags, they will be handed a penalty. And that's about it, my fellow Americans. I know, an intro to F1 video that is almost 20 minutes long. Yeah, the more I wrote, the more I felt like I needed to include. My bad. Now, the rules and regulations and glossary of terms lists are huge, but these basics should be more than enough for you to enjoy a race weekend and understand most of what is going on. The only warning I must give is that due to the time and location of certain races, you will probably end up having to wake up or stay up until odd hours of the night to catch the races. But trust me, it is worth it. Unless it was the 2022 Japanese Grand Prix that I stayed up until 2 a.m. to catch, and then it was delayed for like 2 hours, and then was just absolutely boring to watch, and then I had to be at work for 5 a.m. Yeah, that was a bad day. But anyways, if you took anything away from this, feel free to leave a like or subscribe. If you have any questions about any other aspects of Formula 1 or think I missed anything that might be important to new viewers, feel free to leave it in the comments section. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more. Remember to eat a bok choy, and I'll see you in the next one.